Greetings and welcome to our May 24th special edition of the TED Talks Discussion Club. Tonight's session is led by one of our very own honor students, Kavanaugh, and Caitlin will be talking and leading us in a discussion on two TED Talks related to urban farming. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Caitlin.
Thank you. So one of the reasons I kind of wanted to talk about urban farming and community gardening is it's been really impactful in my life. My family had a garden when we were growing up in the city. It was like one of those patio gardens where you've got a bunch of mismatched pots. You're not really sure where the pots came from. They just did, in fact, show up on the patio one day, and you had a tomato plant growing in there. And somehow, against all odds, that tomato plant survived. And then as I got older, I also tried to keep like small, like little plants, like either like one of those hanging tomato planters, like out on a porch or something easy. And then when COVID hit, I actually was there were 4 of us living together at the time. 3 of my roommates lost their jobs, and there was like a very immediate financial concern for our household. It was one income, 4 people living together. We were thankfully renting a house. And when you have 4 people going absolutely stir crazy, some mild financial concerns, you're like, oh my gosh, what do we do? Thankfully, Denver has a group called Denver Urban Gardens that works with, it used to just be low income residents, and now it's any resident, it's pay what you can afford. And every year they provide citizens with seeds, seedlings, anything you would really need to grow your own at-home garden. And during COVID, that ended up being what kept my roommates out of my hair while I was trying to work during the day. And also just something like we ended up doing together. Like coming out of COVID, you heard so many stories about people who couldn't stand their roommates anymore, relationships that struggled because you were stuck in the house with people for long stretches of time. We spent so much time in our backyard and our front yard trying to somehow convince broccoli to grow in Denver, which was like just a bad plan in general. The tomato plants did well, but we learned a lot. We spent a lot of time outside, and we realized how much it not only like helped provide food, but really helped with our mental health during that time when they were unemployed. I was stressed being the only one working, but we spent time outside. We spent time talking to each other. We were spending free time like researching how to garden. And it helped pass the time a lot better. And even since then, we no longer live in that house. I have patio peppers that I grow every year. I love hot peppers, and you don't really find ghost peppers in the supermarket very often. So I just started growing my own. And now we can make our own hot sauce, so it can be nice and spicy. But there are just so many different benefits to either gardening, like whether it's in your own backyard, on a patio, and then there's just the social benefits that come from community gardening. And so much really wasted space in a lot of either like cities or urban areas. Like one of the videos, the first one that we're going to watch is about a gardener in LA who really took advantage of parkways, those little grass spaces between the sidewalk and the curbside, where normally it's just semi-dead grass and like the occasional tree that you're not supposed to touch for some reason. And it just sits there in that dead space, and really utilizing spots like that to grow food, be more sustainable, and just really bring a community together. So yeah, Mark, if you want to kick us off with that one.
Sure. I'm going to share it, and I'm going to link it in the chat, and then I'm going to pause recording. So this is a guerrilla gardener in South Central LA, Ron Finley, TED Talk. It's from 10 years ago, but still very good. Shoot. And there it is in chat.
So after I saw that for the first time, I actually looked up how he got a citation, like what the city could have possibly tried to cite him for. In 2012, like back before they worked to have it changed, to plant anything other than grass and flowers in that area in Los Angeles required a $400 permit to be allowed to make modifications to that space. So his citation was for not obtaining the proper $400 permit to plant something that could possibly, what was it, obstruct the area the way a vegetable garden does, which I thought was so silly because he had pathways in there. I saw those pathways. But it's so interesting that even though it's city owned and you are responsible to maintain it, you still needed to apply for a $400 permit to even be able to grow vegetables out there because they were considered an obstruction. In 2013, they did, I think it was, what was it? The city council voted to waive the enforcement of that law. So now in LA, you can plant in that space without needing to obtain a $400 permit. It just blows my mind that in an area that's considered a food desert, which is generally like associated with lower income areas, that we would look for people to apply for a $400 permit. Like that is a significant amount of money in an area that is low income.
And I wonder too where the money even goes. I mean, there's no cost for these gardens, the city. What possible purpose would that $400 serve? You know, let alone it seems like an intentional roadblock. It sounds like it's almost underwritten by Burger King or something like that. It sounds like an effort by fast food companies, and it's, you know, to keep people down and enslaved. I don't mean to sound like some radical loon here, but that's really almost what it starts to look like. It's and I was thinking too, Caitlin, about suburbs and these doctrines and covenants, which compel homeowners to keep their front lawns chemically treated to a certain height of grass. Forget trying to plant anything, you know, let alone allow dandelions potentially. But and this is everywhere. I mean, to think that there isn't a vital human right in our country to grow vegetables. It's almost like we need an amendment to the Constitution to support the right of vegetable growing. So,
well, like you mentioned in the suburbs, and I think it's so interesting when you compare like suburban and urban green spaces. When you look into the suburbs, you do see more backyards, you do see more front yards. But when you look in like a more urban, like a more densely packed area, some of the only green spaces are those like little tree lawns between the sidewalk and the curb. And they're owned by the city, which is just so interesting because when you look in suburban areas, you see more green space and it can be privately owned and you can, to a degree, do what you want with it. If you wanted to turn if you're not in an HOA and you wanted to turn your front lawn into a vegetable garden, you could. And like Mark said, there's obviously like rules about height so that people can see, people can still make like safe turns, but there's still plenty of vegetables, even like herbs that you can grow that are closer to the ground. Like you can grow potatoes. Those are generally not going to like obstruct you. You can grow garlic in those little parkway tree lawn areas. There's so many other options, but it's interesting that they're city owned in urban areas.
I do have one concern, and Caitlin, I'd love to hear anyone's thoughts about this. This is the environmental scientist in me. My only concern with all of this is the impact of vehicle emissions, and two things: vehicle emissions and pre-existing soil contamination. Which, you know, there are areas like former industrial facilities and such, where the solution has been to build raised beds and bring in soil, because the soil is not necessarily safe. But also, and this is something I know from gathering herbs and things along the roadside, you stay well away from the edge of the road because of emissions impact on the plants. So that would be my only concern in these neighborhoods, would be the health of the produce in terms of contamination, potentially. Yeah, lead, Mark, you mentioned lead. That's a big one. So students that are here, what are your thoughts about this? Have any of you considered getting out and guerrilla gardening, or at least gardening in your own backyard? How does this message resonate with you? You think we should have a right to garden? Feel free to grab the mic and share your thoughts.
Hi, I'm part of that. I really do think everyone should be able to garden in their own areas that they own. And like she said, in HOAs, they're a whole lot more strict with things like that, and in more suburban areas. I think if it's something that's it's for the community and it's supposed to help out, especially for kids in these more suburban areas that they get a lot of fast food in their faces, as he said in the video, in his area, that's what you see everywhere. If kids see more of gardening and vegetables being grown, I think they'd be a whole lot more interested in it. So, and I thought about myself gardening because I have my young daughter, and I would hope she'd grow up on better food than I did, especially because I grew up in this city as well. And we ate a lot of bad food for us. So I really do hope to start a garden with my daughter as she gets a bit older. And it's something that I think everyone should do too. I think growing your own food is just amazing. It feels like you're more in control of what you're eating, and it can even be something that you bring to other people, and you can make it about your community around you in your neighborhood. So I think it's really amazing.
Carly mentions here, this is my first event I've attended. I just want to welcome you to these honors events, Carly. Delighted you're here. And I recognize your name from Honors 280 as well. In fact, welcome to all those Honors 280 folks that are here tonight, and thank you. So you mentioned that you've been interested in gardening in your home. That's great. Gardening can be intergenerational, which is fantastic. It can get grandparents working with grandchildren. It can be community building. Can get people who never said hello to each other, who might live down the street from each other together. It could be an opportunity to learn about nature, to learn about environmental processes in the city. There's wow, there's just so much. There's so much growing beyond just producing food. I have to admit, I was thinking of your broccoli story there, and thinking there's a book, Caitlin, called A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. It's a pretty famous novel ages back. But I was thinking a broccoli grows in Denver, kind of a modern day. If you ever decide to write your memoirs of your experiences, you can have that title. I won't charge you for it.
A broccoli thought about growing in Denver.
Tried to grow. Actually, true story. I was at my brother and I visited. We're in DC, and we visited Mount Vernon and such, and we saw the garden that was there, and some broccoli growing. So this is younger days, So my brother kind of looks around stealthily, runs out into the garden, grabs some broccoli, and we had that night a bit of George Washington's broccoli. Anyway,
Love it. And I saw Lyric also just wrote starting to grow their own urban spice garden, the idea of self-sufficiency, making your own food. And I think that's just a really exciting part of gardening in general, whether it's a personal garden or a community garden. Growing your own food can also lead to cooking your own food. I know I've fallen victim to it, the allure and ease of takeout, where it's so easy to just grab something real quick. And it's rarely that good for you. I know when I'm ordering takeout, I'm not ordering healthy takeout. I'm not ordering a salad. I'm ordering a burger. I'm ordering pizza. But then when I'm cooking at home, I'm cooking a more green plate, a plate with more vegetables. And there's something about being able to grow your own food that I think encourages that too, that healthier aspect of eating and seeking out those foods that are more fresh because you have them.
Great point about herbs, Mark, and how they're a great place to start. Fresh herbs do wonders for meals. Parsley, cilantro, personal favorite of mine, although it doesn't handle the heat well here in Georgia. Rosemary, that actually does pretty well where I am here in Georgia. I saw you mention it there. Congratulations for overwintering in Ohio. That's quite a feat. But absolutely, and these they just adds a richness of sense as well to your immediate environment. And some of them will grow like weeds, but you have to be careful where you plant your mints, or your mint will be everywhere. It'll just take over everything, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Then there's the irony of the fact that like dandelions are about one of the most healthy foods you can eat. They're a superfood, and we eradicate them from our lawns. So there's also kind of drifting into the lazy person like myself. I can also go out and gather things. Then there's also, and then I'll stop talking about this, there's also the potential for perennial like trees. There's a huge edible forest going in Atlanta. And in my own backyard, I've got a whole grove of pawpaw trees developing. And pawpaws are amazing, and you won't find them at the grocery store because they don't travel well. They're the largest fruit. They get to like this size. It's the largest tree fruit that grows in North America. And the pawpaw tree itself is a tropical genus. Most of the trees in that genus live in the tropics. The pawpaw is the only one that doesn't. So amazing flavor too. It's kind of like a cross between banana and vanilla pudding. Amazing stuff. We never tasted one. It was on my bucket list for the life to taste one. Finally, I realized I said to grow my own. But fig trees are a great place to start too. So.
Can I tell a funny story about things really fast? So, Caitlin, you said something about growing peppers. And Mr. Hilford, you were talking about things that grow wildly just so quickly. My father-in-law, he is a lover of spicy foods and peppers. He'll eat them as snacks. And all over his ranch, he will spit out the seeds from them. And he now has pepper plants that are growing through these old tractors all over his property. It's hilarious. You can be looking at a 60-year-old tractor and just see a tall plant in the middle with peppers popping off of it because he spit them out right under it. Like plants are some of them are just so resilient. And this is in deep South Texas, where if it's like 115 degrees where I am in North Texas, then down there it can be like 125. And these plants just grow amazingly. And there's barely any rain down there. It is just weird, but it's amazing. So just thought
Spicy
I'd tell
peppers
that
get
funny
to thrive in there, which is so funny.
I know.
It's like, okay, you're telling me it's dry and hot. Time to kick up the heat. Let's go. Spicy all the way. But that's one of the nice things about spicy peppers too. Like when we grow peppers outside, we try to do like the hot peppers because they can also act as kind of like a natural deterrent to the squirrels that also like to frequent our balcony. They get one of those spicy peppers first, and they are suddenly much less interested in anything else our patio might have to offer for them.
That's a good way to keep your plants pretty good, huh?
Absolutely.
So thank you for letting me tell that funny story.
I just love the idea of pepper plants just growing out of old tractors. Like you walk by it and it's like, oh, just grab one real quick, spit out the seeds, grow another one next to it.
So it's funny because he will do that. If he sees them growing, he's like, well, that's a snack for me, and grabs it right out and moves right along to the next.
Mark, eat the whole thing.
Yeah, Mark, we have the fig tree. We have these flying squirrels. If you've never seen flying squirrels, they're so ridiculously cute. It's really hard to be upset at them. They have immense eyes, and they're just these cute little cuddly, fluffy things. They occupy one of my bird houses rather, and you can open up the side and see their little faces looking out. But they will strategically just take one bite out of a fig and then go into another one and do the same and the same. They did occupy a neighbor's birdhouse, and they stored pecans. They got pecans from a nearby tree and stored them. And my neighbor was able to have pecans the whole winter because they ended up filling their little structure with pecans. So sometimes you can coexist with wildlife, and sometimes deer are tricky where I am, and maybe some of you have that problem too. Rabbits can be tough. Groundhogs, that is a challenge to gardening in some areas, certainly.
Looks like a lot of people have vendettas against squirrels specifically.
Yeah, squirrels. Yeah, they're
Awesome.
yeah.
Cool. And then do we want to show the next video?
Yep, I'm putting it in the chat right now. I'm gonna let people who are watching the recording know it is How Urban Agriculture is Transforming Detroit by Devita Davison. And those links will be posted in the description of the video as well. So make sure you watch the TED Talk and then come back to the discussion.
I think one of the exciting things that she mentions is really just like the wide variety of opportunities that come from community gardens, like stuff that you may not even think of at first, like not just the access to like healthier food and produce, but then the business opportunities it can provide for like historically low income communities. And I guess it would be interesting to see if anyone here is familiar with like either urban farms or community gardens in their areas, or even kind of like initiatives like she mentioned where they have produce stands for local urban farmers or community kitchens where they're able to make and share and sell that kind of stuff. Grow Pittsburgh. I think, yeah, Timothy mentioned too in chat that there's community farms that are pretty popular in the area around Pittsburgh. A group called Grow Pittsburgh in that area too. There's actually, Tristan mentioned that there's a community garden at a college near them. And there's actually a high school down the road from us that also has a community garden. And I think one of their old sports fields, they converted to a community garden.
There's also a lot of young farmers that are starting their own farms in a lot of these urban areas. And you didn't mention it, but places that this is done include rooftops. There's actually an immense rooftop garden in New York City. And then there's also vertical farms. There's one called The Plant in Chicago, which is several floors. And the idea is to integrate different kinds of agricultural production. I think they even make beer there and other kinds of products. And that's one really, in terms of one challenge that urban farmers face is being able to make a living doing that. Those that decide they're actually going to do it. Community gardens, of course, work by community members all pitching in. But if you're going to have a garden with an actual farmer, how is that farmer going to make money? And that's kind of a tricky thing. What a lot of these farms are doing is they're turning to specialty, sometimes even value-added products like mushroom logs. You can grow shiitake mushrooms in logs you can pre-treat. I know of farms that have done this, and they're incredibly expensive. And you can then source to local restaurants what you're doing. Of course, there's a trade-off because that will enable the farmer to be able to be successful, but it won't enable the food to get in the hands of those that most need it because they can't afford it. Thank goodness there are programs that put SNAP, monies into enable people on those kinds of food funding sources to spend those dollars at local farm markets. And that's one way that they can begin to have access to the food, and the farmers can be able to, because it does come down to sustainability. How do we sustain these kinds of garden projects? So, but Detroit's a neat example. There are lots of interesting garden projects afoot there. It's a really good example. New York City is another. There's a lot of, and Chicago even, a lot of interesting agricultural projects going on. If any of you are interested, by the way, in general and what's going on in your community, I'm going to go ahead and type the wonderful website into the chat here. It's localharvest.org. www.localharvest.org, and that has for some reason didn't. I guess it didn't include the HTTP, but that will actually enable you to search by zip code for area farms, farmers markets, other kinds of ways that you can support what's already going on out there. So I actually have a CSA farm near me that's in kind of an urban area. It's in a couple of lots in a highly developed part of a little town. It's not a huge town, but it's actually using lots. It's kind of amazing what they've managed to do. So
it's also interesting just how much vacant space, like I think in both videos they mentioned like the different amounts of vacant space that were available in their cities, like cities that you traditionally would think of as like super dense or like super populated, like LA. He was saying there was 26 miles or 26 square miles of vacant land. And in the video about Detroit, they mentioned 40 square miles of vacant land. And when you think about how much of that could potentially be converted to areas where people would be able to grow, make larger and more profitable farms too, when we're looking at like independent businesses or local community grow spaces, there's so much room available for it. So it's interesting to see how much urban gardening I think has gotten a little more popular in the past few years, and hopefully seeing like where that land goes and how much of it can actually go towards initiatives like community or urban gardens or larger co-opted urban farms like they had in that video where they were actually able to bring people there and eat at their farm. Like that's so exciting.
And another cool thing that I know some city farmers do this is they will just basically knock on someone's door and say, hey, can I use your backyard to grow vegetables, and I'll give you a portion of what I grow. And that's another. So there's a lot of creative partnerships that are possible as well. And of course, rooftops or right of way for a railroad is another kind of stuff.
And I know it can definitely vary by city too, but I know like here in Denver, some of the community gardens, depending on the neighborhood they're in, they also keep chickens. So they can use the community garden space for chickens if it's an area that allows it. A couple of them have beehives as well. So it's not just about like what you can grow. Sometimes it's also about like, okay, what else can we do in this space that really gives us some of that value, like beekeeping. It's, I feel like you read about dwindling populations of bees, different like colony collapse, like all of these potential issues, and then seeing like beehives at local gardens, like there's so much benefit to that just for the plants that are there, and also again like local communities when we're talking about eating healthier, like that's potentially a more natural sweetener that you can rely on too. Fits in great on your summer salads.
Well, we have a couple of minutes left. Anyone like to share any experiences they've had with either supporting farms in the city environment or visiting them or working on them? Anyone like to share any experiences or thoughts in our last couple of minutes? Or have any questions for Caitlin about urban gardens and urban gardening? Oh, there's a message popping up. Carly says, I'm now inspired to learn more about gardening. And TED Talks give you a lot of information. Yeah. I'm sure you could reach out to Caitlin or to one of us for additional content. Like I said, there's a lot out there. There's a lot of whatever city you're in or near. I bet you there's at least one urban gardening initiative going on there. I would almost guarantee it. Maybe not in Nome, Alaska. That's about the only one I can think of. The far north of Alaska is probably out, but just about anywhere else, I can almost guarantee there's some sort of project going on.
And I know, like Mark's mentioned a couple times, there's a lot of things you can do indoors if you're not looking, if you don't have like a large backyard, if you don't have a deck or a patio. Like my mom grows basil in an old cup that we broke a couple years ago on her kitchen windowsill, and that is just where she grows her basil. And then when she's washing the dishes, she throws water at it. So there's some smaller things that you can do at home. Like Lyric mentioned, like growing an aloe vera plant. Those are great to have at home, especially during the summer. I feel like they're also one of those harder ones to kill. So if you're not necessarily someone with the greenest thumb in the world, there's plants like that that you can also grow at home that are super useful, and your brown thumb will not cause them too much damage.
Well, we should close by mentioning, there's some great posts coming in about helping with carbon dioxide pollution. Absolutely. That's a great one. But I just wanted to let in the last minute mention that if you're here, as you probably are, we're working towards your 15 hours of PLA credit. First of all, you can shortcut part of that by being the next Caitlin. Although Caitlin will be hard to follow you, but the next Caitlin, you could choose a project that interests you, topic, whatever kind that relates to any of the 4 pillars. Locate a couple TED Talks and we'll make it happen. Encourage you to do that. Next, though, you can also, of course, record your hour. And we strongly encourage you to do that right away after this event. To go into that Qualtrics link that's in the Honors Learning community and complete it, and then put it on your spreadsheet, your Excel spreadsheet as well. So you're keeping track of that. It's really best to do that right away after an event like this while the ideas are still fresh and, as it were, composting in your mind. So please do that. And if you have any questions about the honors program, we can stick around and answer those as well. But meanwhile, I want to say a huge thank you to Caitlin, and apology that I was a couple minutes late too. I feel terrible about that, but it was a crazy week. Just got back last night for the graduation and all. And I'm just so excited that you all came tonight. I hope you had a great, enjoyable and meaningful time here. I know I got a lot out of this, a lot of enthusiasm for gardening, even though I'm not an expert. And we just, on behalf of Mark and myself, we just thank you so much for coming. And again, we'll stick around and thank you, Caitlin, so much for making this happen. And we'll stick around and answer questions if you have any. Otherwise, have an awesome evening, and we'll see you at the next TED event next month.